Montana Territory, 1881. The late autumn wind rattled the windows of Samuel Reed's modest cabin as he placed another log on the fire. Outside, snow was beginning to dust the rugged landscape of Pinecrest Valley, a small settlement nestled in the shadow of the Bitterroot Mountains. At 25, Samuel hadn't planned on being responsible for anyone but himself and his herd of cattle. Yet here he was, watching 3 small children sleep peacefully in the makeshift beds he'd arranged in his one-room home. "You've got yourself in quite the situation, Sam," he whispered to himself, running a hand through his thick chestnut hair. The firelight caught the angles of his face. High cheekbones, a strong jaw still smooth from his morning shave, and eyes the color of summer grass. His tall frame moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work and long hours in the saddle. 2 weeks earlier, the Blackwell stagecoach had been ambushed by bandits just 5 miles from Pinecrest. Samuel had been the first to arrive at the scene. The driver and guard were dead, as were a man and woman, the children's parents. By some miracle, 8-year-old Thomas, 6-year-old Emma, and 4-year-old Lily had survived by hiding beneath the luggage. Their tear-stained faces haunted Samuel's dreams still. With no orphanage in Pinecrest and the nearest proper town 3 days' ride away, Samuel had made a decision that surprised even himself. He'd bring them to his cabin until proper arrangements could be made. A soft knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Who would be calling at this hour, and in this weather? Samuel opened the door to find Sheriff Tanner standing there, snow collecting on his hat brim. Behind him stood a young woman, her face partially obscured by a heavy traveling hood. "Evening, Samuel," the sheriff said. "Sorry to disturb you so late, but this lady just arrived on the evening stage. Says she's kin to those little ones you've been looking after." The woman stepped forward, lowering her hood to reveal a face that made Samuel's breath catch. She couldn't have been more than 22, with striking features framed by rich auburn hair twisted into a neat chignon. Her traveling dress, though dusty from the journey, was of fine quality, deep blue wool with delicate buttons running up the bodice. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice soft yet determined. "I'm Penelope Zimmerman, Thomas, Emma, and Lily's aunt." Her eyes, the color of polished amber, met his directly. "I've come to take them home." Samuel stepped aside to let them in, suddenly aware of how rough his cabin must appear to such a refined lady. "Please, come in, Miss Zimmerman. The children are asleep, but Aunt Penny," Emma's sleepy voice called out. The little girl had awakened and was now running across the room in her nightgown. Penelope knelt, opening her arms just in time to catch the child. "Oh, my darling," she whispered, embracing Emma tightly as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm here now. I'm here." Samuel exchanged a look with Sheriff Tanner, who nodded slightly. "I'll leave you folks to get reacquainted," the lawman said, tipping his hat. "Miss Zimmerman's papers are all in order. She's their mother's sister." After the sheriff departed, Samuel stood awkwardly as Penelope embraced the now-awakened Thomas and Lily. The children clung to her, their small voices overlapping as they asked questions about her journey and when they could go home. "Where exactly is home, Miss Zimmerman?" Samuel finally asked, realizing he knew nothing about this woman beyond her name. She looked up at him, still holding Lily in her arms. "Denver, Mr. Reed. I operate a small but respectable boarding house there." "Denver?" Samuel felt a strange tightness in his chest. "That's quite a journey." "Yes, and one we must make as soon as possible," she replied. "I'm eternally grateful for your care of my sister's children, but they belong with family." The certainty in her voice left no room for argument. But as Samuel watched the children with their aunt, a troubling question formed in his mind. Why had it taken her 2 weeks to come for them? "The stage doesn't leave again until Thursday," he said, calculating quickly. "That's 3 days from now. You're welcome to stay here, though it's hardly suitable for a lady." He gestured to the sparse furnishings. Penelope's gaze swept the cabin, taking in the single room with its rough-hewn furniture, the children's makeshift beds, and the small kitchen area. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Reed, but I've taken a room at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house in town. I'll return tomorrow to collect the children and their belongings." As she turned to leave, promising the children she'd return in the morning, Samuel caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Exhaustion, yes, but something else. Fear, uncertainty. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, stepping forward to open the door for her. May I escort you back to town? The path can be treacherous in the dark. That won't be necessary. Sheriff Tanner has arranged for his deputy to wait for me. She paused at the doorway, looking up at him with those amber eyes. Mr. Reed, I don't know how to thank you for saving them, for taking them in when they had no one. Anyone would have done the same, he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. After she left, Samuel stood at the window, watching her figure disappear into the snowy night. The children had already crawled back into their beds, excited by their aunt's appearance, but exhausted nonetheless. He should have felt relief. The burden of caring for 3 orphaned children was about to be lifted. He could return to his solitary life, to the rhythm of cattle ranching that had defined his days before the stagecoach attack. Instead, he felt an inexplicable loss and a growing suspicion that Penelope Zimmerman wasn't telling him everything about her sudden appearance. The next morning, Samuel was chopping wood when he spotted a familiar blue dress making its way up the path to his cabin. Penelope walked with determination despite the muddy trail, her hair now arranged in a simpler style that framed her face. Mr. Reed, she called out, raising a hand in greeting. Samuel embedded the axe in the chopping block and wiped his brow. The physical labor had warmed him despite the chill, and he was conscious of his rolled-up shirt sleeves and disheveled appearance. Miss Zimmerman. The children are inside with Mrs. Jenkins from the neighboring farm. She's been helping with them while I tend to my chores. Penelope nodded, then hesitated. Before I see them, I wonder if I might have a word with you privately? Curious, Samuel led her to the small covered porch. Is something wrong? She clasped her hands together, her expression troubled. I feel I owe you an explanation for my delayed arrival. The truth is, I only learned of my sister's death 1 week ago. The authorities had difficulty locating me because... She took a deep breath. Because my sister and I had been estranged for some time. Samuel said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Margaret, my sister, married against our parents' wishes. They disowned her, and when I continued to correspond with her, they threatened to cut me off as well. Her voice grew stronger. I was young and afraid, so I stopped writing. By the time I found the courage to reach out again, they had already moved west. Penelope's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. The last letter I had from her was 2 years ago, with no return address. She wrote that they were heading to Oregon to start anew. I'm sorry, Samuel said softly. Family rifts can leave the deepest wounds. She looked at him with surprise, as if she'd expected judgment rather than understanding. The children, she continued, they may not remember me well. I've only seen Lily once, as a baby. I'm practically a stranger to them. Her composure faltered. What if they don't want to come with me? Before Samuel could respond, the cabin door opened, and Mrs. Jenkins appeared with the children. Look who's here to see you, the older woman announced cheerfully. The 3 children rushed toward their aunt with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Thomas hung back slightly, his 8-year-old face serious as he studied the woman who claimed to be his aunt. You look like Mama in the photograph, he finally said. Penelope knelt to his level. Your mama was my big sister. We looked alike, even as children. I remember you, he said slowly. You sent me a wooden train for my birthday once. It had red wheels. A smile broke across Penelope's face. Yes, and you wrote me such a nice thank you letter. You couldn't have been more than 4. As the tension between them dissolved, Samuel watched the reunion with mixed emotions. The children clearly recognized their aunt now, their initial shyness giving way to excitement as they showed her their temporary home and the small treasures they'd accumulated during their stay. Mrs. Jenkins excused herself to return to her own farm, giving Samuel a meaningful look as she departed. Those little ones need stability, Samuel, she murmured. But so does that young woman, if you ask me. There's worry behind those pretty eyes. Her observation resonated with Samuel's own impressions. While Penelope was clearly educated and refined, there was something fragile about her determination, like a sapling bending in strong winds. Later, as the children ate lunch, Penelope drew Samuel aside. Mr. Reed, I realize this is an imposition, but I wonder if I might ask your assistance in a matter of some delicacy. Her voice was low to prevent the children from overhearing. I received a concerning message at the boarding house this morning. A man has been asking after me at the stage office, a Mr. Victor Harrington. He claims to be a family friend, but... She hesitated. He is not someone I wish to encounter. Samuel's protective instincts stirred. Is this man dangerous? Not physically, perhaps, but he represents interests that are at odds with my plans for the children. She met his gaze directly. My parents sent him. They wish to place the children in a boarding school back east, separate them. I cannot allow that to happen. Why would your parents want to separate them? Because they believe that's what's proper. Boys to military academies, girls to finishing schools. Her jaw tightened. They didn't approve of how my sister raised them together on a frontier farm. They see this tragedy as an opportunity to correct what they viewed as Margaret's mistake. Samuel considered her words. The stage doesn't leave until Thursday. That gives this Harrington fellow 2 more days to find you. Yes, she agreed grimly. And I have no doubt he will. The conversation was interrupted by little Lily tugging at Penelope's skirt. Aunt Penny, will you read us a story? Mr. Samuel always reads before nap time. Penelope's expression softened. Of course, darling. She glanced at Samuel. We can continue our discussion later. As she settled onto a chair with the children gathered around her, Samuel slipped outside, troubled by this new development. He'd grown attached to the children in the short time they'd been with him. The thought of them being separated and sent to cold institutions thousands of miles away sat poorly with him. But it wasn't just concern for the children that troubled him. In less than a day, Penelope Zimmerman had awakened something in him. A protective instinct, yes, but something more. Her courage in defying her wealthy family to protect her sister's children spoke to her character. Samuel made his decision. He would help her evade this Harrington fellow, even if it meant altering his own plans. But first, he needed to verify her story. Too many con artists roamed the territories, preying on tragedy and goodwill. He saddled his horse and rode into town, heading straight for the telegraph office. 3 hours later, Samuel returned to the cabin, his mind more settled. The telegraph operator in Denver had confirmed that Penelope Zimmerman indeed owned a respectable boarding house there, catering mainly to unmarried school teachers and shop clerks. Further inquiries revealed that the Zimmerman name was well known in Boston banking circles, with a reputation for both wealth and rigidity. When he arrived, he found Penelope sitting on the porch steps, watching as the children played with the neighbor's dog in the yard. The afternoon sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. They seem comfortable with you, Samuel observed, dismounting. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. Children are remarkably resilient, and they've clearly been well cared for these past weeks. Her expression grew serious. Mr. Reed, about our earlier conversation, I've been thinking about your situation, he interrupted, sitting beside her on the step. The regular stage route would take you through Clearwater Junction. If this Harrington fellow is watching the stage lines, that's where he'll be waiting. Penelope's eyes widened. You believe me, then? Let's just say I made some inquiries that support your story. He held her gaze. I'm proposing an alternative. There's a private freight wagon heading to Helena day after tomorrow. From there, you could catch the southbound stage to Denver. It's a longer route, but less likely to be watched. Hope flickered across her features. That would be wonderful, but surely a freight wagon wouldn't take passengers, especially children. The driver, Caleb Miller, owes me a favor. He'd do it for the right price. Samuel hesitated. The only problem is, it's rough travel. No proper accommodations along the way, just camping. Not what you're accustomed to, I imagine. To his surprise, Penelope laughed, a bright, unexpected sound. Mr. Reed, my sister and I grew up in Boston drawing rooms, but the last 3 years I've been running a boarding house single-handedly. I've cleaned rooms, repaired roofs, and negotiated with suppliers who thought they could cheat a woman in business. Her eyes sparkled with determination. A few nights camping won't defeat me, especially if it means keeping the children together. Samuel couldn't help but smile at her spirit. Then I'll speak to Caleb tomorrow. He paused, watching as Thomas showed his sisters how to throw a stick for the dog. Miss Zimmerman, please, call me Penelope. If we're to be conspirators, we should at least be on a first-name basis. Samuel, then, he replied, oddly pleased by this small intimacy. Penelope, why is keeping these children so important to you? Important enough to defy your parents and risk your livelihood. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the children. Because I know what it's like to be shaped by people who see you as an obligation rather than a blessing. She turned to him, her expression open and vulnerable. My parents never wanted children, just heirs. They hired nurses and governesses to raise us, then sent us to boarding schools as soon as possible. Margaret escaped through marriage. I escaped by moving west after my fiancé died in the war. I'm sorry about your fiancé, Samuel said softly. David was a good man. His death gave me the courage to start over. Her voice strengthened. These children deserve to be loved for who they are, not molded into what someone else thinks they should be. My sister would have wanted them to stay together, to grow up with freedom and affection. Before Samuel could respond, Thomas came running up, his face flushed with excitement. Mr. Samuel, can we show Aunt Penny the secret fort we built by the creek? Samuel exchanged a glance with Penelope, whose eyes now danced with amusement. I think that's an excellent idea, he said, rising to his feet and offering Penelope his hand. Every aunt should know where the secret fort is. As they followed the children down the path toward the small creek that ran along the edge of Samuel's property, he became acutely aware that he was still holding Penelope's hand. More surprising was that she hadn't pulled away. For the first time in years, Samuel Reed felt the stirring of possibilities he'd long since abandoned. The following morning brought unexpected complications. Samuel was teaching Thomas how to feed the chickens when he spotted a rider approaching, Sheriff Tanner, moving at a pace that suggested urgency. Samuel, the sheriff called, dismounting. We've got trouble. That man I mentioned, Harrington, he's in town asking questions about Miss Zimmerman and the children. Claims he's their legal guardian, with papers to prove it. Samuel's stomach tightened. What kind of papers? Court order from Massachusetts. Looks official enough, though I'm no lawyer. The sheriff lowered his voice. He's got 2 men with him. Hired guns, if I had to guess. They're staying at the hotel, but they've been making inquiries all over town. Does he know they're here? At my place? Not yet, but won't take long to figure out. Mrs. Holloway mentioned Miss Zimmerman was visiting orphans out your way. The sheriff looked troubled. Samuel, if those papers are legitimate, I can't interfere. It would be kidnapping. Samuel nodded grimly. I understand. Thanks for the warning, Sheriff. After Tanner departed, Samuel found Penelope inside, helping Emma and Lily make rag dolls from scraps of fabric. The domestic scene, her head bent close to the girls, their laughter filling the small cabin, struck him with unexpected force. Penelope, he said quietly, we need to talk. She must have read the concern in his face because she immediately sent the girls to help Thomas with the chickens. What's happened? He explained the situation rapidly. If these papers are real, we need to move quickly. Caleb won't be ready until tomorrow, but we can't wait that long. Penelope paled but remained composed. Could we challenge the legality of the documents? Surely a Massachusetts court has no jurisdiction in Montana territory. Eventually, perhaps, but the sheriff would still have to honor them until a territorial judge could review the case. That could take weeks. Samuel ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. There's a small hunting cabin about 15 miles from here, in the foothills. It belongs to my friend Daniel Thompson, but he's in Bozeman for the winter. You could stay there tonight, and I'll bring Caleb to you at first light. 15 miles, Penelope murmured, calculating. The children couldn't walk that far, not in this weather. No, Samuel agreed. But I have 2 horses. You and the girls could ride one, Thomas and I the other. We'd have to travel light. She met his gaze steadily. You're risking a great deal for people you barely know, Samuel. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But I've come to care about those children. And, he hesitated, then continued honestly. And I believe in what you're doing for them. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a recognition. Thank you, she said simply, but the words carried weight beyond their simplicity. They worked quickly after that, gathering only essential supplies and explaining to the children that they were going on an adventure. Samuel wrote a note for his nearest neighbor, asking him to tend the livestock, making no mention of where they were going. By mid-afternoon, they were ready to depart. Samuel helped Penelope mount his mare, Sadie, then lifted Lily and Emma up to sit before and behind their aunt. Thomas, looking solemn with responsibility, climbed up behind Samuel on his gelding, Rusty. Hold tight, Samuel instructed as they set off, taking a game trail that led away from the main road and into the thickening forest that covered the foothills. The journey was slow and tense. Every snapping twig made them pause, listening for pursuers. The children, sensing the adults' anxiety, remained unusually quiet. Only Lily occasionally asked questions, which Penelope answered with remarkable patience. As dusk approached, the forest opened into a small clearing where a sturdy log cabin stood, its chimney cold and windows dark. "There it is," Samuel said, relief evident in his voice. The cabin was basic but sound. A single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and 2 narrow beds. Samuel quickly got a fire going while Penelope organized their supplies and settled the increasingly tired children. "We should be safe here," Samuel said quietly once the children were fed and tucked into one of the beds, all 3 curled together for warmth. "Harrington doesn't know about this place, and few locals even remember it exists." Penelope nodded, the firelight casting shadows across her face. "Samuel, I've been thinking about what happens after Denver." She hesitated. "Running a boarding house while raising 3 children won't be easy. I have some savings, but—" "You'll manage," he said with confidence. "You're stronger than you realize." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I wonder if I'm being selfish, taking them so far from the only home they've known recently." Samuel considered her words carefully. "Children need love more than location. You can provide that." He paused. "Though I admit, I've grown fond of them myself." "They speak of you constantly," she said softly. "Mr. Samuel taught me to fish. Mr. Samuel knows all the constellations. Mr. Samuel makes the best flapjacks." Her amber eyes reflected the dancing flames. "You've given them something precious in the midst of tragedy, a sense of security." The intimacy of the moment, the small cabin warm against the cold night, created a bubble that felt removed from the urgency of their situation. Samuel found himself studying the curve of her cheek, the way her hands moved gracefully as she spoke. "What will you do after we're gone?" she asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "Same as before, I suppose. Tend my cattle. Expand the herd come spring." "Alone?" The word hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to articulate. "I've grown accustomed to solitude," he answered carefully. Penelope looked away, toward the sleeping children. "Solitude has its virtues, until you discover its hollow center." Before Samuel could respond, a sound from outside froze them both, the unmistakable approach of horses. Samuel moved swiftly to the window, peering through a gap in the crude burlap curtains. In the moonlight, he could make out 3 riders approaching the cabin. "It's them," he whispered, turning to Penelope. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were resolute. "How did they find us?" Samuel shook his head. "Someone must have seen us leave. The territory's full of eyes looking to earn a few dollars with information." He moved quickly, checking that his revolver was loaded. "Wake the children. There's a root cellar under the floor there." He pointed to a trapdoor partially hidden by a bearskin rug. "Get down there and stay quiet." Penelope hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll stall them. Caleb should arrive by dawn. If you hear shooting—" He didn't finish the sentence, but her expression told him she understood the implication. As she hurried to wake the children, Samuel extinguished all but one small lamp and positioned himself near the door. Outside, he could hear the men dismounting, their voices low but distinct. "Looks occupied," one said. "Light inside." "Reed's horse is here," another replied. This voice was cultured, authoritative. "Harrington," Samuel guessed. A sharp knock rattled the cabin door. "Reed, open up. I know you're in there." Samuel took a deep breath, then called out, "Who's asking?" "Victor Harrington, legal guardian to the Blackwell children. I have a court order for their return." Samuel glanced back to see Penelope ushering the last child, Thomas, down into the cellar. She met his eyes briefly before closing the trapdoor and covering it with the rug. He opened the door to reveal 3 men. The one in front was middle-aged, expensively dressed despite the frontier setting, with a thin mustache and cold eyes. Behind him stood 2 rougher men, one with a visible gun holster. "Mr. Harrington," Samuel said evenly, "you're a long way from Boston. Where are the children, Reed?" Harrington demanded, attempting to look past him into the cabin. "Safe in town, with their aunt." Harrington's expression hardened. "Miss Zimmerman is not fit to raise those children. My employers, her parents, have legal custody. The court was quite clear on this matter." He produced an official-looking document. "You're interfering with a lawful custody arrangement." Samuel didn't take the paper. "Seems to me that 3 orphaned children belong with their closest kin, not shipped off to strangers." Their grandparents are hardly strangers. People who disowned their own daughter and haven't even come to claim the children themselves? Samuel's voice carried an edge of contempt. Sounds like strangers to me. Harrington's facade of civility slipped. I don't have time for frontier justice, cowboy. Those children represent the future of the Zimmerman banking legacy. Their education and upbringing are too important to be left to a spinster running a boarding house. He gestured to his companions. Search the cabin. Samuel's hand moved to his gun. You don't want to do that. The tension escalated instantly, with both hired men reaching for their weapons. What might have erupted into violence was interrupted by a small voice from behind Samuel. Stop it. You're scaring my sisters. Thomas stood in the middle of the cabin, having somehow slipped out of the cellar without Samuel noticing. The boy's small face was set in determination, though his hands trembled slightly. Thomas, Harrington said, his voice suddenly gentle. There you are, my boy. Where are your sisters? Where is Miss Zimmerman? Before Thomas could answer, the trapdoor opened again, and Penelope emerged, followed by the girls. She straightened to her full height, placing herself between the children and the door. Mr. Harrington, she said coldly, I should have known my parents would send you to do their dirty work. Miss Zimmerman, he replied with false cordiality. Your parents are most concerned about your impulsive behavior. Abducting your sister's children. I have not abducted anyone, she interrupted. I am their closest living relative, and I intend to provide them with a loving home. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. A noble sentiment, but legally irrelevant. Your parents have obtained temporary guardianship pending a formal adoption. The documents are quite in order. He held out the papers again. Sheriff Tanner has reviewed them and acknowledged their validity. Samuel watched Penelope's face, saw the moment when doubt crept in. Is that true? She asked quietly. About Sheriff Tanner? Harrington nodded. He's waiting in town. He gave us until morning to return with the children before he organizes a formal search party. His tone softened to something almost sympathetic. Miss Zimmerman, surely you see this is for the best. What can you offer these children? A cramped existence in a boarding house. Your parents can provide the finest education, every advantage. Samuel saw something dangerous flash in Penelope's eyes, not defeat, but calculation. May I see the court order, Mr. Harrington? She asked, her voice steadier than before. Harrington handed her the document with a triumphant smile. Penelope studied it carefully, her expression revealing nothing. This appears to be in order, she finally said. She looked at the frightened children, then back at Harrington. I request one night to prepare them for the journey. Surely you can grant that small mercy. Harrington hesitated, clearly suspicious of her sudden cooperation. We'll leave at first light, she continued. The children need rest before such a long journey. Very well, Harrington finally agreed. But my men will camp outside. Any attempt to flee will result in immediate action. After Harrington and his men departed to make their camp, Penelope turned to Samuel, her eyes bright with purpose. The court order is genuine, she said quietly, but incomplete. It grants temporary guardianship pending a hearing next month in Boston. She took a deep breath. Samuel, I need to ask you something that may change everything. The intensity in her voice made his heart quicken. What is it? She glanced at the children, who were huddled together by the fire, then back to him. How do you feel about marriage? Dawn broke clear and cold over the hunting cabin. Samuel stood outside, watching as Harrington and his men prepared their horses for the journey back to town. Inside, Penelope was helping the children dress warmly for the ride. The night had been long, filled with whispered plans and one momentous decision that still left Samuel feeling as though he were balancing on the edge of a precipice. Yet beneath the uncertainty lay something solid and true, something he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge until Penelope's unexpected question had forced it into the light. Harrington approached, adjusting his expensive gloves. I must say, Reed, I'm surprised by Miss Zimmerman's change of heart. I expected more resistance. Samuel shrugged. She wants what's best for the children. Indeed, though I suspect her parents will be disappointed by her decision not to return east with them. Harrington studied him with calculated interest. You seem quite invested in this situation for a man who was merely providing temporary shelter. Those children survived a tragedy, Samuel replied evenly. Anyone with a heart would be invested. Further conversation was interrupted as Penelope emerged from the cabin with the children. She had arranged her hair simply but elegantly, and despite the rustic surroundings, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Mr. Harrington," she said, "before we depart, there's been a development you should be aware of." She moved to stand beside Samuel, her shoulder almost touching his. "Mr. Reed and I were married last night." Harrington's face registered shock, then suspicion. "Married? That's impossible. There's no minister for 20 miles. Judge Wilson was hunting in these parts," Samuel said smoothly, referring to the territorial circuit judge who was indeed known to take seasonal hunting trips. He performed the ceremony. The children were witnesses. Thomas, catching on quickly, nodded solemnly. Judge Wilson had a big book and made them say vows and everything. Harrington's expression darkened. "This is preposterous. A transparent attempt to circumvent the court order." "Not at all," Penelope replied calmly. "The court granted temporary guardianship to my parents because I was an unmarried woman with limited means. As Mrs. Reed, wife to a successful rancher, those concerns no longer apply." She met Harrington's gaze steadily. "The court order specifically states that the arrangement is subject to review upon material changes in circumstance." Samuel admired her composure, the way she'd identified the loophole in her parents' legal strategy. They'd anticipated her resistance, but not this kind of lateral thinking. Harrington was clearly floundering. "Your parents won't accept this. They'll challenge the marriage, claim coercion. They're welcome to try," Samuel interjected. "But by the time any such challenge makes its way through the territorial courts, these children will be settled in their new home with 2 legal guardians who actually want them." He put his arm around Penelope's shoulders, the gesture both protective and possessive. "This isn't over," Harrington warned, but his bluster had faded. Without legal grounds to separate the children from both their aunt and her new husband, his position had weakened considerably. "I believe it is," Penelope replied. "Please convey to my parents that the children will be raised with love and respect for their heritage. They are welcome to visit, as grandparents, not as owners claiming property." The standoff might have continued, but the sound of an approaching wagon interrupted them. Caleb Miller pulled his freight wagon into the clearing, looking confused at the assembled group. "Morning, Samuel," he called. "Got your message about needing transportation to Helena. Didn't realize you'd have company." Samuel suppressed a smile at the perfect timing. "Change of plans, Caleb. We'll be heading back to my ranch instead." He turned to Harrington. "Unless you have further business here, Mr. Harrington?" The Boston lawyer's face worked through several emotions before settling on cold resignation. "This deception won't stand, Miss Zimmerman." "Mrs. Reed," she corrected firmly. "And it's no deception. Sometimes the heart recognizes in days what others might take years to see." Her words sent an unexpected warmth through Samuel's chest. What had begun as a strategic alliance to protect the children had crystallized into something far more complex during their night of planning. The idea of marriage had started as Penelope's desperate gambit, but as they talked through the implications, sharing a home, raising the children together, building a life, something had shifted between them. By the time Judge Wilson had actually arrived, alerted by Caleb at Samuel's request, the decision to make their pretend marriage a legal reality had felt like the most natural choice in the world. Harrington and his men departed shortly after, leaving Samuel, Penelope, and the children standing in the clearing with Caleb and his wagon. "So," Caleb said with a raised eyebrow, "married, huh? That's moving even faster than your pa did with your ma, Samuel." And they were legendary for their whirlwind courtship. Samuel felt heat rise in his face. "It's been an unusual few days." Penelope laughed softly, the sound brightening the crisp morning air. "I believe that's an understatement, husband." The word sent a pleasant shock through him. He turned to her, suddenly aware that despite their legal union, they'd had precious little time to discuss what would come next. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked quietly. "All of you." Penelope glanced at the children, who were already clambering excitedly into Caleb's wagon, then back to Samuel. "I think we are," she said, "though I suspect we have much to learn about each other." Samuel helped her up onto the wagon seat. "We have time," he replied, settling beside her as Caleb clicked to his horses. A lifetime, in fact. 1 year later, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the expanded front porch of the Reed Ranch house. Samuel wiped his brow as he finished securing the last of the new porch railings, satisfaction filling him as he surveyed the changes a year had brought. The modest one-room cabin had grown to accommodate its new inhabitants, a proper bedroom for the girls, another for Thomas, and a third for Samuel and Penelope. The main living area now featured large windows that flooded the space with light, and a kitchen where Penelope created meals that made the previous year's bachelor cooking seem like a distant, unappetizing memory. But the physical changes paled next to the transformation of the household itself. Where silence had once reigned, now laughter and occasional squabbles filled the air. The solitary rhythm of Samuel's days had given way to the complex harmony of family life. Inside, he could hear Penelope working with Emma on her reading, their voices rising and falling in the cadence of a familiar story. Thomas was in the barn, learning to care for the new foal that had been born just 2 weeks prior. Lily, now 5, was carefully arranging stones and patterns along the garden path, creating what she called her fairy road. Samuel set down his hammer and went to join his youngest charge. "Those are mighty fine stones you've got there, Lily girl." She looked up at him with a serious expression. "The fairies need them to find their way home at night, Papa Sam." The name still caught him by surprise sometimes. Not Mr. Samuel anymore, but Papa Sam, a title the children had bestowed upon him around Christmas time. Penelope had become Mama Penny, the slight alteration acknowledging both their new role and their respect for the parents the children still remembered and honored. "Well, we certainly wouldn't want the fairies getting lost," he agreed, kneeling beside her. "Perhaps they might appreciate these as well." He pulled 3 small, polished agates from his pocket, stones he'd collected from the creek bed specifically with Lily's fairy road in mind. Her eyes widened with delight. "They're beautiful, like tiny moons." "Samuel," Penelope's voice called from the doorway. "There's a letter from Denver." He rose, ruffling Lily's hair before joining his wife on the porch. After their hasty marriage and Harrington's departure, they had expected legal challenges from the Zimmerman family. Instead, 3 months had passed before a stiffly formal letter arrived, acknowledging the marriage and requesting regular updates on the children's well-being. Penelope handed him the newest correspondence, her expression guarded. "It's from my mother this time, not the family lawyer." Samuel studied her face, still learning its subtle shifts after a year of marriage. Their union, born of necessity and mutual respect, had deepened into something neither had anticipated. The attraction that had sparked during their first meeting had grown steadily, nurtured by shared purpose and daily discoveries of each other's character. "Do you want to read it together?" he asked gently. She nodded, and they settled onto the porch swing he'd built in the spring. The letter was longer than previous communications, less formal in tone. Penelope's mother wrote of family matters, enclosed a small photograph of herself and Penelope's father, and, most surprisingly, expressed a desire to visit Montana the following summer. "She wants to come here," Penelope said softly, her finger tracing the carefully penned words. "After all this time." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "People can change when given reason to." "Perhaps." She leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly in the hollow of his shoulder. "Or perhaps they simply recognize when they've been outmaneuvered and decide to make the best of it." He chuckled. "Either way, it seems your parents are accepting our family." "Our family," she repeated, the words carrying a weight of wonder still. "Sometimes I wake up and can't believe how much has changed in a year." Samuel understood completely. He had gone from solitary rancher to husband and father in the space of months. The adjustment hadn't always been smooth. They'd had their share of disagreements and difficult moments, but the underlying certainty of their choice had never wavered. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question only half joking. Penelope turned to face him, her amber eyes serious. "Only that we didn't meet under simpler circumstances." She smiled then, the expression transforming her face in a way that still made his heart skip. "But then again, I might never have discovered what kind of man you truly are without seeing you with those children first." He brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, marveling at the privilege. "And I might never have discovered that the most beautiful woman in Montana Territory was also the bravest." She laughed and rose from the swing, pulling him to his feet. "Flattery will get you everywhere, Mr. Reed. But right now, it's almost supper time, and we have hungry children to feed." As they walked hand in hand toward the house, Samuel reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. A tragic stagecoach robbery, 3 orphaned children, a desperate plan, all leading to this moment of perfect contentment. Inside, the children's voices called out in welcome, and Samuel Reed stepped across the threshold of his home. No longer a solitary cabin, but the heart of a family forged in adversity and bound by love.